All right, excellent. Well, let's talk about Firebase today. Super excited to talk about not only Firebase, but in particular, talking about building quality with Firebase. If we're going to talk about something like building quality with Firebase, we kind of need to start out by defining what quality is. And in order to kind of begin, there's really two sides of it. The first one is let's kind of step back in time. Let's go back to 2012. So iPhone released in 2007, Android released in 2008, and by 2012, they really were the only players in kind of the smartphone market. You know, they had all these predictions that the world would end in 2012. For BlackBerry, it was kind of true. By that point, they were pretty much done for. Pretty much the only players were Android and iPhone. And this is about the point that many of us kind of started getting into Android development. Some of us, at least those of us with this much gray hair. I remember when I was trying to decide, like, do I want to do Android development or do I want to do iPhone development? Do I want to get an Android phone? Do I want to get an iPhone? One of the things that I kind of heard was, oh, Android phones, you get way more control, but they're way less stable, which is actually kind of interesting because there was a study done a few years after that determined that in terms of like crashes and bugs, actually they were pretty even. But I have a theory as to why Android was viewed as kind of lower quality applications in terms of stability. And that is because in Android, whenever your application hit an exception, you got a screen that looked like this. Whenever your application slowed down or the main thread stopped for a couple of seconds, you got a screen that looked like this. Whereas on iPhone, if any of you have done iPhone app development, you know when your application crashes, it just kind of closes out. I remember a time when I was in a demo, we were showing off different features, and the iPhone developer was showing off one of his features that he had recently built, and was using the application, and it, you know, just closed out, and he was like, "Oh no, I accidentally hit the home button." You know, it's like kind of winking. It's like the crash experience in an iPhone was like, "Oh, wait a second, did you just hit the home button? Something just happened. Why don't you try it again?" Whereas Android, it's like, oh my goodness, it tells you like the process name and, you know, please try again, or you get this kind of scary dialogue. So that's one thing we mean when we talk about quality is crashing and stability. But there's another side to quality as well. Um, I want to ask this question as a pop quiz. As software engineers, what is our primary motivation for building software? Is it A, to figure out whether or not it can be done? Is it B, because somebody pays us to write the software? Is it C, to show off to our coworkers how smart we are? Or D, to remove a problem from somebody's life? Like, ultimately, the answer is probably all of the above. But really, when we when we build software, usually we're trying to remove a problem from somebody's life, whether it's building a feature that we think will make somebody's usage of our application a little bit more streamlined, a feature that makes somebody's life a little bit better, a feature that like removes an edge case that when somebody hits makes them have a really bad day. That would be like bugs. Or, you know, maybe like a product manager or like the owner of our company have to make their life better as we kind of achieve their visions, or maybe our own visions. Um, there's another aspect to quality, which is how good of a job are we doing at achieving these goals, at removing the problems from somebody's life, or providing the opportunity. Um, so when we ask what we mean by quality, there's a few kind of rubrics that we go by. There's fewer crashes, there's fewer bugs, there's better app performance, less skipped frames, but there's also user behavior. Do people are people doing the thing that we built for them to do? If we build a new feature, are people using that feature? And there's another one, which is retention. Let's say we build a feature that's supposed to solve somebody's problem and they come in and they do it. That's great. But if they never come back and do it again and they immediately seek another solution to the problem, we actually probably didn't solve that problem. We probably, we provided them with an opportunity and they tried it once, but if they move on and don't try it again, that probably indicates that it didn't resolve their issue in the way that we expected. So where does Firebase come into this? So sometime around 2012, when Android had this reputation of being relatively unstable, and it was kind of the Wild West, Google started offering some services to try and remedy that perspective that Android apps were unstable. It started giving information about crashes in the Play Store dashboard. It started kind of buying up other suites of services. First, as Firebase itself, which is a remote data store. Then they bought an analytics system. They added that to Firebase. They bought Crashlytics and added that to Firebase. And in the end, it ended up being, Firebase is the blanket umbrella for this suite of services that is offered by Google. Most of them are free. Not all of them, particularly a lot of the cloud computing type services are not free, but a lot of the pieces that we're going to talk today are completely free. Most of them are designed to improve quality. You have elements like data store, authentication consolidation, cloud functions, machine learning. Like I said, these are here to provide kind of engineering functions to make it easier, particularly for mobile developers, to build smarter applications that have more collaboration. But there's also an analytics system that we'll talk a little bit about today. There's user audiences, so you can cohort your users and deliver custom experiences for different people. There's smart predictions. Those are kind of cool. We'll talk about those as well. There's, of course, crash and bug detection through Crashlytics, and there's A/B testing functionality. Ultimately, when we build software, we build it to solve problems, and we should know if the problems have been solved. We should be able to kind of prove it scientifically. And if you haven't, been using it, Firebase is a good way for us to be able to know this. So let's see it in practice. Give me just a second. I'm going to switch my sharing to another screen. We are going to look at the Firebase demo console today. I'll probably switch back and forth a little bit from the demo console and our internal kind of testing console, because I don't have administrative access to the demo console. And there's a few things that I may want to talk about that you kind of need administration access for. So here we are. This is Firebase. This is their kind of demo console. You can kind of see a little bit of information here about their sample project, which is the Floodit project for Android and iOS, with a number of daily active users and some information. I believe that Floodit is a game that they provided for free just to populate this dashboard with various information that'll help us kind of see as we go through what the different pieces of Crashlytics do. So we'll do a quick tour of the build section, but we won't spend much time in here just because I really want to focus on the pieces kind of down here today. So first, there's authentication. Firebase Authentication is actually really powerful. The thing about it is we have a lot of different sign-in methods. And really, when users sign in, we should be validating that with our backend. But if you're an older company, if you've been doing this for a while, really, it's kind of complicated. If a user has email and password, you have to store that email and password. You have to do it securely. If they have Google sign in, you then need to validate with Google that that sign in is available and is still correct. The same for Facebook and Twitter, and if you're using an iPhone, Apple, all of these need to be connected. Firebase provides a layer over that, so really the only communication you need to do is making sure that Firebase still trusts this user. So the user can sign in with an email and password, or just an email. We actually have that set up in our project. They can be anonymous users. They can sign in with Google. And we, particularly with our communication with our backends, we don't really have to care. Like, they can just kind of be whoever, and we can know that they're trustworthy because Google handles that trust relationship. It's pretty important. And I actually think Firebase Authentication is an extremely cool feature that can be a huge time saver for developers. There's Firestore. Of course, Firestore is kind of the Firestore and the real-time database are kind of the original project of Firebase, where kind of the Firebase name came from, and the piece that was first purchased by Google. These are real-time databases that let you send information without having to build like a full backend. Of course, storage and hosting are pieces for, kind of maintaining your backend presence. Cloud functions give you the ability to set up a kind of a small block of code that will run in the backend. You can actually connect it to your remote config. This is one piece we use it for. We connect it to remote config to send updates via FCM, which is the Firebase messaging service, Firebase Cloud Messaging, to kind of tell users to kind of mark their cache as dirty anytime your remote configuration updates. You can do other kind of pieces like that. Of course, machine learning, you could probably do a dozen talks about Firebase machine learning, so we'll leave that for now. Let's talk about Crashlytics. If you don't have Crashlytics set up in your application, in my opinion, you definitely should. Super, super powerful utility that gives you a ton of information about crashes, non-fatals, and ANRs. With Crashlytics, if you install it in your application, anytime your application crashes, it will automatically send crash logs. It'll tell you the stack trace, which is kind of similar to what you get in the Play Store, but it'll also give you some additional details. So we can say, for example, this crash is 64% on Samsung devices, 15%.
Yeah, the shared screen. We lost the presentation.
Oh, we lost the presentation. Thank you for letting me know.
Sure. Sorry for interruption.
Not at all. I'd much rather interrupt than sit here talking while it failed to present. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome. So yeah, Crashlytics gives us information. Here's an interesting piece that Crashlytics tells us. This is 100% on Android 8 devices. So it says this is probably an issue with a particular version of Android, and when we're testing, we should probably use an Android 8 device to figure it out. All of this is kind of similar to the information that you get in the Play Store, but there's a few additional pieces as well. Within the Crashlytics SDK, you can set up a number of keys. So for example, in this case, they set up the fact that the game mode is progressive, the level is level 1. You can kind of step through here. You can see actually in a couple of these cases, the game mode is progressive and the level is level 1. But in this case, the game mode is quick play and there is no level. But one of the pieces where it really shines is coming into the logs. We'll come back to this piece in a little bit. Let's talk about performance real quickly as well. So Firebase Performance gives you the ability to send some custom traces. There's a couple that are automatically sent, like the app start, or the app in background, app in foreground. Lots of people use Firebase Performance in different ways. So I won't necessarily speak a lot about what is the best thing to add traces to, though I will kind of leave the comment that we had some trouble in our application where the traces were non-deterministic, like a trace started at one point and then there were 3 or 4 ending points. And that kind of resulted in some relatively inconsistent traces. So really the idea of traces, one of the pieces is maybe giving it like a start point at the beginning of a render or a database load, and then an endpoint at the end of that render or database load, so that you can keep track of the highest, most significant places in your application. It also will keep track of network requests for you. So in this case, the only network request being used is this one to Crashlytics. And you can click in and say, okay, what's our response time? How has our response time changed over time? So we can see here there was a little bit of an increase in kind of the 5% latency. So you can see some additional discussions on that, but Firebase performance tracing can be a good way to see, like, how's our start time doing? How's our network traces doing? How's our rendering? So, it'll tell you like how long screens take to render, how many frozen frames there are. So in this case, we can see actually settings activity seems to be having a pretty tough time with its rendering. Let's see. So let's keep looking. We have Firebase Test Lab. This actually is a really cool way if you are setting up espresso tests. You could build this into your CI pipeline so that the tests actually run on a remote device. So you can come in, for example, this one has a couple of devices. You can see a video. which it apparently won't let us see because we don't have all the permissions set up because it's a sample project. But yeah, you can set up some tests and see the results and the logs and the video in Test Lab. So that's kind of an introduction to the monitoring side of things. I want to talk a little bit about the analytics piece. So Firebase has the ability to send analytics events. And these events will kind of give you a little bit of a picture of what people are doing in your application. So it has this fun real-time view. It's kind of a novelty, but you can see for this sample application, this is where people are using the application. There's, of course, reasonable presence in the United States. This morning when I was checking it, it was a little earlier in India. So you saw a bunch in India and, various places in Africa and Europe as well. You can kind of see like how many users are using the app and what are they doing. So with the Firebase Analytics SDK, you can, firstly, it has a couple of events that it sends automatically, like update or remove or first open or app open. But there are some as well that you can manually set up. Now it requires you to use underscores. So if you haven't used if you have another analytics system, you may need to do some interpretation to send them to SDK. Or to send them to the Firebase SDK. But for example, in this sample application, we have the ability to see like how many people are completing levels. And how is that number changing over time? So we have level complete here. We can kind of look back and say, let's look at the last 90 days. How is usage of this game, particularly as the completion of levels goes, changed? So we can kind of see like usage is a little bit up. It was up and then went down and then went up again. Yeah, so using this as you roll out a feature, you can kind of keep track of like how many events are we sending? How many users are completing those events? How many times are they completing it? So, in this case, the average user completes 47 levels. So for some of the projects that we're working on where we want to drive user behavior in certain directions, this kind of chart can be invaluable in sort of understanding whether the feature that we've built has made the impact that we want it to. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but yeah, just coming into this dashboard, it kind of gives you a picture of how you can send events and kind of what those events do. They end up in a system that kind of give us a picture of how people are using our application. Let's talk. We can talk briefly about conversions. Any of these events that we send in our kind of raw Firebase Analytics table can be marked as a conversion. Let's see, there we go. That means that when somebody kind of completes this event, it is significant. And conversions can play into some of kind of our marketing efforts or things like that. So I won't talk about them too much because I'm not necessarily an expert in that area, but I do want to talk a little bit about audiences. This will play in a little bit later when we get into the engagement section. Using audiences, you can say, hey, users who do this specific thing or participate in this particular event, set them aside. So for example, in this case, users who beat level 2 anytime in the last like 30 days or so. So here we go. You can see if their level up count is greater than 0 within the last, still loading for us, but okay, set to maximum limit. So basically, if they've ever beaten level 2 or fired level up more than once, and place them within this cohort or audience. So that's important because when we come down here to some of the engagement elements, you can target specific audiences directly. So with that, actually, well, let's see, we can look at these last 3 as well. So custom definitions allows you to kind of say, let's look at a particular event with a particular parameter, or users with variables set for them. I haven't used this one that much personally. Latest release will give you a little bit of information about kind of what's going on in production, so you can see a super kind of quick chart here that talks about your number of active users, their stability rate, and then some information about the status. I'm not sure why this one marks it as needs investigation. I think that it could be because either the engagement was down, or it could be that it was just kind of hard-coded, so you can see that it has a little bit of intelligent tracking in here. But yeah, looking at this, you can kind of see what's our adoption like. So in this case, 99% of users are on version 2.65. If you're rolling out an application, you can kind of use this to see how many people have actually updated. You've rolled it out to 100% in the Play Store, but it could be that only 50 or 60% of users are actually on your latest version. For understanding your other metrics or understanding whether you've kind of resolved certain crashes, this can be super helpful to be able to see your version adoption. Yeah. And then lastly is a debug view. You can actually connect your own device as a debug device. There are instructions for that in the Firebase console, and it'll show you kind of a real-time flow of the events that you're sending. So I don't have a debug device hooked up, so it'll just say waiting for debug events here. But on your own system, this can be really great for testing to see if the events that you're sending are being sent, if they're being sent with the parameters you expect, and if they're being sent at the time that you expect. So let's come down here a little bit and talk about engagement. I think engagement is actually one of the cooler pieces here. So let's say you built a new feature, super excited about it, getting ready to ship it in your application, but you think it's going to solve a user problem in a way that is beneficial, but you're not 100% sure. I'll use an example from a couple of years ago. I used the Mint application to kind of track my finances. Super cool app, really useful for kind of keeping track of my spending. A couple years, probably 2 or 3 years ago, they had a redesign that they had worked on, and the redesign looked really flashy, but as a user, it kind of made it harder to use the application. So they turned it on for a percentage of users, and the reaction to it was really negative. They actually turned it on for a percentage of users, and I think I remember reading that usage was down, so they actually turned it off. Let's talk about how we can do something like that in our application. So remote config has the ability to deliver flags, either Boolean or numeric or strings. In this case, they're all kind of numeric. Well, no, we have strings here as well. So let's see. It says app install, add unit IDs, default value of 0. Let's see if we can find a good example in here. So the extra steps pack 2 counts. You know what? I think this is a good time for me to hop over to our internal application and talk a little bit about how we use this at Premise. Give me a second. Let me switch tabs. Let's see. So here is our remote configuration. We have a few features that we're currently working on, such as the ability to recommend one or multiple tasks when a user completes a task in our marketplace. So here, we'll talk about these two. This one has the ability to kind of show a new filtering ability that we're working on. We can set this to true, we can set it to false, we can set it to true, but only if the user is in certain countries via setting up a cohort. So if they're in certain countries, we'll set it to false. And what will happen in our application is whenever it reaches out to Firebase Remote Config SDK, which we have set up, it'll ask it, hey, what's the value for show market filter alpha? In this case, it'll be like, okay, it's true. So in that case, we will display a UI element that would take the user to like a separate experience, whereas if it reached out and it was false, we would not display that UI element. Same for this one. So whenever a user completes a task, we want to recommend 3 different kind of future tasks to them. We can actually set that up so that it recommends 2 or 4, which actually will play into A/B testing in a little bit, because we could look at it and say, okay, what happens if we only recommend 2? What is the user behavior then? Do they enjoy it more? Do they enjoy it less? How do these pieces kind of play together? Remote config is kind of the tool that we use to make decisions in the application. Yeah. So let's look at A/B testing. So we have these remote config values. You can either turn them off or on. Really, there's kind of 2 values. You can turn them off or on. You can turn them on by country. But what if you wanted to turn it on for, say, 25% of people and ask the question, does this actually solve their problem? Does it change their behavior? So in that case, we have the ability to create an A/B test in Firebase. You can come in here and create an experiment. The experiments can be used to send notifications or in-app messages or remote config. So notifications will say, if you had 3 different kind of texts of a push notification, you wanted to see which one users engaged with the most, you could set up an A/B test for notifications to say, okay, click this to try our app to one user, send a bunch of emojis to another user, and see which one results in the most engagement. You can do the same for in-app messaging, which will be pop-ups that a user sees when they come into your application. But what we're going to look at today is doing it with a remote config. So let's say test experiment. This is setting up an A/B test. So let's go ahead and set up our QA application. We're going to go ahead and turn this on to 100%. You have the ability to set up an activation event. So this can be important because let's say if we want to measure the difference for users after they complete some sort of action. So with the example in our application, we only want to kind of measure the difference for users who complete a task. Giving it an activation event will tell us, only include users in kind of the A/B analytics if they complete this submission upload completed event. Then we have the ability to set goals. So goals kind of say, what is it that we want this A/B test to do? So let's say we want to increase the number of users who start a task, for example, in our project. Setting this as the primary metric will cause Firebase to tell us intelligently who is the leader. However, we can add a couple additional metrics to it to to be able to check multiple pieces. So submission upload completed, for example. So then we set up our A/B test parameters. So let's see, we will, just for testing purposes, we'll set kind of a random parameter here. Let's say if we set it to 18 and then another group for 21, we could go in and set up these values. You can also set up multiple of them. So let's see, let's go ahead and show year-end card to false and to true. So what's going to happen when I start this experiment is 50% of users, as defined in our targeting, will see this value to false and this value to 18. And then 50% will see this value to true and this value to 21. We can see that in the review. I'm not going to start this experiment because it's in our system. But if we look at A/B testing results, we have the ability, and again, this is QA, our QA system, so all of these numbers are kind of made up and not necessarily representative. We have the ability to go in and see, if we're looking at retention as our primary metric, we can actually say, the baseline is actually performing a little bit better. There is a chance that the baseline does a better job at increasing retention than our test version. So yeah, that's kind of how A/B testing and remote config can work better to tell us how do we solve our users' problems. Now, there are some limitations to this. For example, when we looked at our events, we had the ability to check. Let's see. Let's go back to the demo project. Give me just a second. So when we looked at our events, we had the ability to check let's see. Let's look at challenge accepted. We had the ability to check these different parameters: event count, total users, event count per users, and then event value if your event has a value. In an A/B test, really, I believe the only value that you can check is total users. So it's important when you're looking for like a success metric, looking at it like a little bit kind of subjectively and kind of understanding that it has some limitations in what it tells us. But if you're kind of just getting started, let's look at these completed experiments. Here's a sample no-op experiment. So this experiment actually changes a no-op param, which the fact that it is resulting in a difference probably means that there was a small group of users working with this, and this change is actually just random happenstance. But looking at this chart, we have the ability to see the different groups and how they kind of change behavior. But it does do it in such a way that it could be a little difficult to interpret unless your change was relatively obvious. So let's see. Let's see if we have any in this test project that has so adds interstitial frequency. In this case, their goal was to kind of increase the number of users who started a level. And when they set up the experiment, it looks like more ads, less ads, and very few ads actually didn't have that much of a decrease compared to, or didn't have that much of an increase. In this case, the baseline was probably the most successful, and 53% of users who completed their kind of impression event, which, let's see, is not set. So that's actually 50% of all users in the baseline completed the level start event, whereas a little fewer users in these other groups completed that event. So that's kind of a quick run through of Firebase. I've realized that I've gone a little bit over time. I apologize. Let's jump to Q&A. I'm guessing we'll probably have some discussion, hopefully, if you guys want to chat about any of these different pieces. Oh, well, while we're at it, we'll look at two last pieces. If you wanted to create a short link that opened to your application and potentially deep linked to a specific place, that's what dynamic links does. And of course, AdMob is connecting to your advertising providers. So there we go. That's a super fast rundown of Firebase. It is a really, really powerful system that has the ability to make a significant impact on our project and understanding our customers. And hopefully you all have fun using it. My name's Will. You can find me on LinkedIn or email me. I try to hang out in the Kotlin Lang Slack as well. And I'll try to put these slides on Speaker Deck, though I realize that much of the content of the talk was really just kind of chatting through the Firebase dashboard. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was great. I really enjoyed the talk. Unfortunately, my cat left, but not because she was bored. I think I was moving too much for her, not giving enough attention to her. But anyway, I think it was very enjoyable, and don't worry about running overtime. The next slot will be networking anyway. Okay, but let's get to the Q&A section, and there's already some questions showing up. I will show them on stage. So here's the first one from Clemens Slupnik. Especially in the EU, sending data to US services/companies is quite problematic regarding GDPR, that's the General Data Protection something regulation, I guess.
Yes.
Would you advise asking users beforehand whether they want to enable analytics and crash reporting in the app?
This is a really terrific question, and I think there's two sides to an answer to this. You know, the first side is sending any analytics and crash reporting at all, and I think it's reasonable to include a little bit of information to say, hey, we do send anonymized analytics and crash reporting from our application. Like it's 100%. I think you will probably need to do some checking with somebody in some sort of legal, or maybe checking some documentation to figure out what that needs to look like. But at very least, having a disclosure somewhere in your application that, hey, we're sending this data is important. But the second piece to it is being incredibly careful about the data that you send. Remember, anything you send as a Firebase parameter, as a Crashlytics parameter, any of this data gets uploaded to this system. So for example, I was at a company once where we were using users' emails as the primary key to Crashlytics. That is a big no. Like we can't send that kind of data to these kinds of companies. So whatever data you're sending, please make sure that it is anonymized. It is not something that like you maybe you can send like an internal identifier that your system uses. That is a reasonable plan, and sending that identifier makes it a little bit easier in Crashlytics to be able to coordinate that with other data. For example, if you use another analytics system like a premise, we use Amplitude, and so I send the Amplitude ID so that we can kind of look at Amplitude, which Amplitude has a lot more advanced kind of event analysis and coordination. But make sure you don't send don't send their phone number, don't send their email. And it both for Crashlytics and for kind of your regular events, like be really careful about the properties that you send, and be really intentional about them. Yeah, great question.
Indeed. So next question. It's from Tal, Kirschbaum maybe? Kirschbaum. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. But anyway, Firebase devices farm supports running automated tests. Other mobile testing services support manual testing as well. Are there any plans to bring manual testing to Firebase?
This is a great question. I have no idea. I know what you mean about the concept of manual testing. I would be surprised if there were any immediate plans. I know I know Samsung's device farm at least did last time I looked into it. But yeah, I have no idea. It's a great question. However, I do know that I will mention that Firebase's Test Lab is free for the first little while. So it could be that because of that, they kind of want to limit it to avoid kind of, I don't know, people causing trouble. You'd be surprised how much fraud comes into any of these services. So I'm guessing that probably there are some limits to it to avoid people kind of using these devices for like fraudulent, like using them to sign up for referral links or anything like that. Yeah, good question.
Okay, so next one, it's from Nikolai Demkov. Are Firebase Analytics less powerful than Google Analytics, or is this the same tool but different UI to get the reports?
Yeah, this is a great question. I know that there's some sort of connection to them. I'm not 100% sure, but I will go ahead and kind of give it the caveat. Firebase Analytics are not extremely powerful compared to paid tools. They are wonderful because they're free, and they're also wonderful because of how they connect to different Google projects. There are actually, there's one piece that I kind of didn't get to, but I want to mention it briefly, which is predictions. Firebase Analytics has the ability to use machine learning to predict how likely a user is to complete a certain event based on their completion of other events. So you can use this alongside your A/B testing to, say, for example, hey, we have users that are really likely to churn. We have this really risky A/B test. Let's target only the users who are likely to churn with this risky test, so that we can kind of measure it on the less like less likely to be like super valuable users. I know that doesn't answer this question at all, but I think some of the value in Firebase Analytics is the interplay with their other services. But in general, in terms of their reporting, I think you're right that they are less powerful than Google Analytics. I know that the cross-pollination of the two events has changed recently, and I'm not 100% sure where it's at right now in terms of kind of the direct answer to whether it's the same tool but different UI. I do know that you can get Firebase Analytics into BigQuery, which will let you run kind of your standard SQL analysis on the events, which kind of gives you the ability to have more intelligent tooling and analytics on kind of those events. But I also know that piece is not free. So most of the pieces that we talked about today, other than if you go over the usage for Test Lab, most of them are free, which is really where the benefit lies. In the pro and cons column, being free is a pretty significant pros.
Yeah. By the way, I can add some little anecdata to this. So I previously had to look at used devices. So what share between different kind of device models, and I checked both Google Play Console and also Firebase, and they differed a little bit. So that's interesting.
Yep.
Anyway, the next question.
Beginner guide to learn Firebase.
Well,
great
yeah,
question.
Vivian D'Souza, I think, and any beginner. Yeah, you already read it. Sorry, you were faster.
Yeah. If you go to Firebase without having anything set up, it will actually have screens that kind of talk you through the different pieces. They have videos, they're kind of short, they're kind of fun, they have good animations. That probably is where I would start, like a video that kind of introduces, basically they have like the 10-minute version of what we got like the 30-second version of in this talk. That'd probably be a good place to begin. And then with each of them, you can kind of click the links and go to the documentation. The documentation of Firebase is super thorough, but it's, sometimes that can be a blessing. Sometimes it can be a bit of a curse, depending on how much documentation you were hoping to read through to get to the answer you were looking for. But in general, I actually really like it. I think the Firebase documentation is great, and I think that's a great place to begin with each of the different sections of the Firebase system.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so next one from, again, Tal. First of all, thanks for the presentation, as I see. Yeah, thanks indeed. Do you have experience with using services similar to what Firebase offers, like AWS offering or other analytic services? How does Firebase differ from those? Are there situations where Firebase is preferred?
Yeah, so this is a really excellent question. I do have experience with some of them. The thing about Firebase is it's so broad that there's a number of different services. There are competitors for data store, there's competitors for Firestore, there's competitors for authentication, kind of, though Firebase, its kind of thing is consolidating its competitors for authentication. For analytics as well, and A/B testing, all of these have competitors. I don't think any of them have competitors that play together as nicely as Firebase, which is one of the really beneficial pieces. There's something that I kind of alluded to, and again, unfortunately, realizing that I was already 15 minutes over, didn't get to go back to, but it's if you are in Crashlytics and you go into your logs, any events that you send to Firebase events will actually show up in your logs. So you can kind of see if you send an event for like went to a screen or started something, like you can look at those logs and say, okay, so before this user crashed, they went to this screen, they logged this thing, they did these 5 or 6 different kind of pieces. That is really, really useful. So I would probably make the kind of claim Firebase has a place, especially because it's free. It has a place in most of our projects. Again, if we can work out the logistics with GDPR and we can handle like the engineering time. But I would also probably argue that it's not the best at any of the things that it does in terms of analytics in particular. For analytics, I've used a couple different systems. Amplitude is my favorite. I love Amplitude. Amplitude has a chart for usage, and in our company, I am our company's #1 Amplitude user. The ability to kind of correlate data is just super, super powerful, as well as like the abilities to dive into it. I've used LeanPlum for A/B testing. Their A/B testing will give you better data than Firebase will, but it's also expensive. And Amplitude, I believe, also has recently launched an A/B testing platform. Again, these are things that if you're just getting started, if you're a smaller, medium-sized company, they'll be really expensive. Whereas Firebase's solutions are free. And like, as software developers, if this is something that isn't kind of coming down from the administrative perspective, but it's just like, we really want to be able to prove if we're launching a feature that it's more stable. We want to be able to run it out slowly. We want to be able to kind of measure the efficacy. I'll tell you what, for those of us who are like working for companies, when it comes like review season, saying, hey, I can prove that we bumped up our daily active users by 20%, that goes pretty well on a performance review. Having these metrics is really good. There are other systems that do it better, but I don't think there are any other systems that do it freer. Does that answer this question? Yeah, it's a really good one.
Thanks for the feedback. By the way, I see from the thumbs ups that I think it is. By the way, I can vouch for Amplitude as well, and also the part that you said about performance review and the reviews and the showing data.
Yeah, right. It's like ideally, and this is why I wanted to kind of start with the kind of thought about like, what do we mean when we talk about quality? Like, we mean whether we can prove that we've solved the problem that we set out to solve. And analytics is just a great way to do that.
So next question from Dennis Titsa, maybe. I have seen a lot of apps directly expose their Firebase API key in their app. Couldn't somebody add a lot of garbage to the API owner's dashboard with that? That's interesting. You maybe heard about Donald Daters, I guess. I don't know if you heard about that story, William.
Wait, no, what happened?
Well, there was basically a politically driven dating app in the US before Trump was elected, and they basically exposed a lot of API keys for their Firebase backend right in the shared preferences, and so it took a little bit of time, a couple of minutes for someone to break their database and see everything. So I guess that's what Dennis is talking about, but I'll let you answer the question.
Yeah, this is a terrific question, and unfortunately, it's not one that I've looked into in probably 3 years. So I don't know offhand, but I believe I'm gonna make a statement, and please double check it before you use this in your project. I believe in your Firebase dashboard, you need to set up your application's the SHA fingerprint of your key store. So there's kind of security from both sides. Your project, you have to have a key in your project, but also Google makes sure that you were signed with the right key before it lets you kind of access the information, which I believe, I think that is the reason why kind of it's a little bit more lax with the kind of security, but please double check that.
Indeed, thank you. So for the next one with Mamu Alim, again, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Any ideas on Firebase Test Lab, Espresso, RoboScript's compatibility with Jetpack Compose-based projects and when it's coming to Firebase?
See, this is a great question because this is actually what I've been working on for the last 2 or 3 weeks. I believe that Jetpack Compose does work with, let's see. I know I'm going to make this statement and then I'm going to be wrong. So please, again, double check. I think that using the Espresso, Jetpack Compose doesn't use the normal kind of the same pieces that you used previously. Hold on, let me pull up my PR and make sure that I'm saying the right thing, because I have a PR open right now that actually fixes some of our kind of Jetpack Compose Espresso tests. I believe that if you use the like the setup for Espresso test in the documentation, it should work with Firebase Test Lab. That's a good question. I might need to double check on that, but I think that it should be able to work today.
I guess if you remain for the chat afterwards, you can still
yeah. I can double check and we can chat after. This is a good question.
Yeah. So next one I will mark as answered. Sorry, Ahmed, but I think we already talked about how to choose platforms between Firebase, Google, or anything you would like to add, William.
No. I'll definitely say if I were to be asked the question, would I recommend Amplitude to a friend? My answer would be a strong yes. However, Firebase is very free again. So, yeah.
Okay, so next question from Abdullah Hanif. We all have seen Firebase's real-time data magic, but if I ask you to provide some details about it, how this actually works. Example, silent notification or pub/sub or sort of things. Do you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know what's going on under the hood there. Probably it's using the same infrastructure that Firebase Cloud Messaging is. Firebase Cloud Messaging is insanely fast and very, very good at delivery and retry and all of that. So that'd be my guess, but it's just a guess. Yeah.
Possible. Also, again, this is a guess from me as well, but we can just piggyback on some other calls, I think, as well. But your guess is as well as good as mine. Okay, there's one more question from Benny. Rachutin. I would have a question specifically related to Firestore. If I have an application where the data is always available for all users, is Firestore the right tool here? I always get email notifications that there is a security issue with my rules. That last part is interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of two questions.
If you care to elaborate, Benny, in the chat, that's always welcome, by the way, but you can answer. Will.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know what to say to you in terms of this one. I think it sounds to me like Firestore is probably the right tool for that, where the data is always available for all users, but I'm not sure about the security issue. I think probably somebody who knows more about it would need to have a look at the setup. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. Anything in the chat? Someone said the same happens with real-time database. I don't know how it's related, but that's not Benny. So anyway, I will mark this as answered. If it's okay, then some other questions showed up. One from Chaba Toad. Nobody mentioned the effort yet, and by it he means the Firebase, how the Firebase Analytics experience is Flutter.
That's a great question. I know that it has an SDK. I've never used it personally, so good question.
Yeah. Okay, so there's one more. Christopher Oyersun, maybe. Are there any plans to do snapshot testing easier by some new Firebase tool? Well, I have to say, William is not a Firebase developer.
Yeah, I don't work for Firebase. I just use it, so I can't help you with that one. But maybe Christopher, maybe you can be the one to build it. Who knows? It's we can always build services and utilities ourselves. Really, Firebase is essentially just giving us access to a device to run kind of small snippets of code. So maybe that's something that we could build as developers. Yeah, good question.
I think that's all. So thank you very much, William. Do you want to say anything else? Where can people find you? I mean, I guess you already showed it, but if you care, you can show it again.
Sure.
So people know how to.
Thanks for joining. You can find me. I'm not super active on Twitter, but I do at least try to have like a slight presence there. You can email me, my first initial, my last name @gmail.com, or find me on LinkedIn. Yeah. And thank you guys for listening, for sticking around, asking great questions. Super fun to chat about Firebase today.